is a progression of a story. We have creation, and then from creation, we have the fall of creation, and humanity begins to be more and more evil, and then Noah comes, and then after Noah, we have Abraham, and the story of Abraham, and the creation of this nation, Israelites. We have this progression of a story. Well, from Exodus to Deuteronomy, well, in one sense, we have a progression of a story, but instead of being in one book, it's kind of spread out over 4 books, especially like next week when we look at Leviticus, which I know that's the week everybody is looking forward to. Leviticus, it's a story, but it's also a list of laws and a list of how the Levite priests are supposed to be priests. And so when we start looking out from here on, we start seeing not just the books themselves, but the story that is happening across these 4 books. So the title of today's class is Journey to Sinai, which we got through Exodus 15 last week. And you'll notice it only takes them 4 chapters to get to Sinai. But it takes them like another 40 years to get to the land of Canaan. Well, there's a story in between there. And so we'll look at this week the journey to Sinai, what happens at Sinai, and all the laws that are given, which fall out into Leviticus. And then we continue the wilderness journey, the wilderness story, not just in Numbers, but in Numbers and Deuteronomy, because Deuteronomy, while yes, it can tell a story, Deuteronomy is mainly a sermon given to the Israelites right before they enter into the land. So that's what we see with these 4 books. Now, once we hit Joshua, then we start seeing the progression of a story within these books. But over the next 4 books, which is about 3 weeks that we're going to be covering them, we're going to jump around a lot, especially in the next 2 weeks when we look at Leviticus and Numbers. The story jumps around a lot. We also start to see the story repeat itself quite a bit. Especially in Numbers. So I'm excited for that. I'm excited for Leviticus next week. It's a lot of fun. But just remember the point of what all of this is. It's God redeeming his people. God moving his people to a place of redemption. And we saw last week the microcosm of this redemption. See, God didn't forget Joseph and all his brothers had died, yet we see the outworking of Genesis 1. Israel starts to multiply and be fruitful, no matter what Pharaoh does to them. He works them harder so they don't have time to multiply, or just flat out kills them so that way they can't multiply. Well, whatever he does doesn't work. The Israelites continue to be blessed by God, continue to multiply, continue to be fruitful, and eventually it gets to the point in Exodus 2 where God hears the wailing, hears the crying of his people and says, all right, it's time. So he raises up Moses, he sends Moses to Pharaoh, and brings his people out of Egypt. And the crossing of the Red Sea is this redemptive arc. They pass through on dry ground. And 1 Corinthians 10 talks about this being the baptism of the Israelites, the beginning of the redemption of God's people, and also the beginning of God wanting to be with his people. And that's the story where we are now. Remember what happened all the way back in Genesis 3. We have Adam and Eve making that decision, rebelling against God, and God having to remove his presence from them. They're getting kicked out of the garden. They can no longer be in communion with God, meaning physically being with God. Because if God is with them, now that sin has entered into them, if God was around them, they would cease to exist. Which in one sense is very scary, but in the other sense is awesome. God's power is so strong that where he is, sin cannot exist. Now, we're not quite there in the story yet, but this is also what makes Jesus' sacrifice so important. Because Jesus defeats all sin, so that way the Holy Spirit can then come and indwell within us. Whoever is covering that part of the story can dive more into that. But this is also why the burning bush is such a cool part of the story. Because what happens? So Moses encounters God at Sinai in Exodus 3, and he sees this bush, and it's burning. But what? It's not consumed. And I think much more than just this, but I think this is kind of a metaphor for what God wants to be among his people. See, God is that burning flame. God is that power among his people, yet he wants to be among them and not consume them. Remember, the story is the story of redemption. God can't be with his people because we would be destroyed, so God works in different ways in order to be with his people. He builds a nation. He continues this blessing. He starts to redeem his people. And the Israelites are now in the midst of God's plan. So Exodus 15 was the song of them after they crossed the Red Sea. God's going to redeem us. God is our salvation, is what Moses says in Exodus 15, verse 3. Well, unfortunately, the Israelites don't really start out on a great foot. Exodus 16, let's read a little bit. Starting in verse 1. Then they set out from Elim, and all the congregation of the sons of Israel came into the wilderness of Sin, which is between Elim and Sinai, on the 15th day of the second month after their departure from the land of Egypt. And the whole congregation of the sons of Israel grumbled against Moses and Aaron in the wilderness. This is a theme. We will see this quite a bit. And the sons of Israel said to them, Would that we had died by the hand of the Lord in the land of Egypt, when we sat by the pots of meat, when we ate bread to the full. For you have brought us out into this wilderness to put this whole assembly to the death with hunger. Moses had just explained in Exodus 15 that the crossing of the Red Sea was a redemption event. That God is remembering his covenant with Abraham, yet the Israelites already in chapter 16 are complaining about how they have been brought out to die. How they would rather be back in Egypt, where they were slaves, by the way, and oppressed. They would rather be there than brought out by God. Verse 4, Then the Lord said to Moses, Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, that I may test them whether or not they will walk in my law. Now it will be on the 6th day that they shall prepare what they bring in, and it will be twice as much as they gather daily. It's Sabbath, you can't work on the Sabbath, so that's why they need to get twice on Friday. So Moses and Aaron said to all the sons of Israel, At evening you will know that the Lord has brought you out of the land of Egypt, and in the morning you will see the glory of the Lord. And he hears your grumbles against the Lord, and what we are that you grumble against. So God provides food, and it's enough portion for the day. So he hears the grumbles of the Israelites, and he says, okay, I will provide for you. And on Friday, the day before Sabbath, I'll provide a double portion. So that way you don't have to work on the Sabbath. This comes to be known as, what is God providing? What's the word? Manna, yes. So God is providing manna, which is my favorite Hebrew word in the Bible. I think I've mentioned this before. Does anybody know what the word manna means? Yeah. It literally just means, what's that? So God provides them food, and they eat it, but they're kind of like, what is this? I love it. It's amazing. I love the way Hebrews name things. What's up? Yeah. Because, I mean, it doesn't really tell us what it is, but God, the point is God hears them grumble, God hears them complain, and God provides food. You know, just like how in Exodus 2, God heard them complain, God heard them cry, and he delivered them out of Egypt. See, even though the Israelites complain, and let's be honest, they're not complaining about the wrong things. I mean, if I was hungry, I would probably complain about wanting some food. Now, my heart is probably not in the right place because I need to remember that God just delivered me from slavery and from oppression. But they're not necessarily complaining about the right food or about the wrong thing. They're just not remembering what God has done for them in the midst of their complaining. So God provides food, and we see this theme throughout the next couple of chapters. They complain about meat, so God provides meat. They complain about water, so God provides water. They complain about all these other things, but God still provides for them, and God still delivers them, like in Exodus 17. God delivering the Israelites from the Amalekites. God still delivers, even though they're complaining. And eventually we get through the story of Israel in the wilderness, and eventually they get to Sinai. And we get the beginnings of Israel's plan and God's plan with Israel. I want to read 19, and then I got a couple of questions, because this lays the foundation for Israel's time in wilderness, and especially the rest of Exodus. Which, if you're ever reading Exodus, about 10 chapters of Exodus are fun descriptions of the tabernacle, which are just a blast to read through for 8 chapters straight. But Exodus 19, let's everybody turn to Exodus 19, starting in verse 1. In the 3rd month, after the sons of Israel had gone out of the land of Egypt, on this day they came into the wilderness of Sinai. Then they set out from Rephidim and came to the wilderness of Sinai and camped in the wilderness, and there Israel camped in front of the mountain. Now Moses went up to God, and the Lord called him from the mountain, saying, "Thus you shall say to the house of Jacob, and tell the sons of Israel, you yourselves have seen what I did to the Egyptians." See, when Yahweh starts to talk to the Israelites through Moses, he always reminds them what he's done for them. And as we have already seen within the story, they very quickly forget. They forget that God just delivered them through the Red Sea, and so now they're all worried about, well, what food are we going to eat? What water are we going to drink? So when the Israelites, we'll see this theme, when the Lord speaks to Moses, to the Israelites, it's a reminder, you yourselves have seen what I just did to the Egyptians, and how I lifted you up on eagle's wings and brought you to myself. I mean, that's a reward in and of itself. Verse 5. So now then, if you will indeed listen to my voice and keep my covenant, then you shall be my treasured possession among all the peoples, for all the earth is mine. And you shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation. These are the words that you shall speak to the sons of Israel. So Moses came down, called the elders of the people, and set before them all the words which the Lord had commanded him. And all the people answered together and said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. And Moses brought back the words of the people to the Lord. And the Lord said to Moses, behold, I will come to you in a thick cloud so that people may hear when I speak with you and may also believe in you forever. Then Moses told the words of the people to the Lord, and the Lord said to Moses, "Go to the people and set them apart as holy today and tomorrow, and let them wash their garments, and let them be ready for the third day, for on the third day the Lord will come down on Mount Sinai in the sight of all the people. And you shall set bounds for the people all around, being aware that you do not go up on the mountain or touch the border of it. Whoever touches the mountain shall surely be put to death." Remember, the idea of God's presence is so powerful that when people are in the midst of his presence and they have not been cleaned, they have not been sanctified, their sin will be destroyed, meaning they will be destroyed. Because of Genesis 3, we are corrupted flesh. So the Lord says, "Sanctify them, and then I will come down." Verse 13, "No hand shall touch him, but he shall surely be stoned or surely shot through. Whether beast or man, he shall not live. When the ram's horn sounds a long blast, they shall come up to the mountain." So Moses went down from the mountain to the people and set the people apart as holy. And they washed their garments. And he said to the people, "Be ready for the third day. Do not go near a woman." So it happened on the third day, when it was morning, that there were thunder and lightning flashes and a thick cloud upon the mountain, a very loud trumpet sound. So all the people who were in the camp trembled. And Moses brought the people out of the camp to meet God, and they stood at the foot of the mountain. So this is God's plan. God has brought his people out of Egypt, and he says, "All right, I'm going to make my covenant with you. This is what you are to be." Verse 6, "You shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." We'll talk about both of these for just a little bit. What does it mean to be a kingdom of priests? Let's take that apart just a little bit. The easier one first. What does it mean to be a kingdom? What is a kingdom? A large group of people and land that belong to one person. Yeah. Randall? You have to have a territory. Yes. Laws given by a ruler. Yeah. And you're supposed to obey those laws. Yeah. And there's rewards for following. Yeah, for sure. What else is a kingdom? Something, or a people ruled by a king. Yeah. So there's kind of a hierarchy to it. Yeah, for sure. Under the protection of a king. Yeah, that's a big part. Yeah. The word that I kind of also keep hearing, no one actually said it, community. A kingdom is a community with a king who rules over them, a king who protects them, laws they must follow. Yeah, for sure. What are priests? Now, you can take the definition of priest as broad as possible. We don't have to be super specific here. What are priests? Spokesmen. Yeah. What else? Intermediaries between God and man. Yeah. What else? Teachers of the law. Yeah. What else can a priest be? Advocates. Specifically about the king. Yeah, they speak about the king. They advocate. Connection. How so? Yeah. So there's the intermediary type thing. Yeah. Okay. So we know what a kingdom is. We know what priests are. So what does it mean to be a kingdom of priests. What does that mean? Everybody shares in that responsibility. Yeah, I heard someone else back here. Jamie. Community of people who seek connection with God. Yeah, yeah. I like that. What else? What else? What does it mean to be a kingdom of priests? We all have access to God. Yeah. There's not just one person doing it for us. It's all of us, right? Yeah. Okay. What, just in the timeline of the Israelites, we've studied Genesis. They were in Egypt. They came out of Egypt. They've been in the wilderness for about 3 months. They're finally at Sinai. And the first thing that God says to them is, I want you to be a kingdom of priests. What might be weird about this statement? They're not really a kingdom. Yeah, that's fair. They don't have a king yet. In one way, but yeah, what were you going to say, Sean? Yeah. Yeah. There's not an established priesthood yet. So even among the Israelites, remember, the Israelites are followers of Yahweh. That's what Exodus 3, Genesis 17 talks about God. He reveals himself to Abraham, and he reveals himself as El Shaddai, saying, I will be your God over your people. In Exodus 3 and Exodus 6, the Lord, Yahweh, reminds Moses of the promises that he made to his fathers, to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and saying, I will be God over you. I will be your God, and you will be my people. Yet, when you have a religion, you have the mediaries. You have the people that speak to God, they speak to God, and they bring the word to the people. Who, for right now, who is that person to the Israelites? Moses. Yeah. God is speaking to Moses, and Moses is speaking to the people. So in a sense, Moses is a priest. It's also ironic that he's a Levite. We'll get to that in a little bit. But God doesn't just say, hey, I'm only going to speak to Moses, and he's going to be the only priest. God tells Moses to tell not just one person, not just two people, not just one tribe, not just this other tribe, but tell all the people, you're going to be a kingdom of priests. What do you think that means for the rest of the world? Yeah. For those of you that didn't hear what David just said, summarizing is the Israelites were meant to be an example for the rest of the world. Yeah. So the question is, what does this statement mean for us? So I'll ask this question. Are we today, in 2024, are we meant to be a kingdom of priests? Yeah, I think so. This is 1 Peter 2. As you come to him, the living stone, talking about Jesus, rejected by humans but chosen by God and precious to him, you also, like living stones, are being built into a spiritual house to be a holy priesthood, offering spiritual sacrifices acceptable to God through Jesus Christ. And jumping down to verse 9. But you are a chosen people, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, God's special possession, that you may declare the praises of him who called you out of darkness into his wonderful light. Peter quotes exactly what God said in Exodus 19. Yeah. What does it mean to be a kingdom of priests? It means to be example. Be an example. Be stewards. What was Nathan's sermon all about today? What was that, Mike? Evangelism, yeah. Spreading the gospel. Going out and teaching people about Jesus. Sharing the love of Christ with one another. That's what it means to be a kingdom of priests. Y'all are right. Y'all all said the answer. Priests are people who talk to God and relay that message to people who are unable to talk to God or are not quite ready to talk to God. That's what priests do.